Hello and welcome. This week we're going to discuss what is culture. I want you to consider and think about your own culture and what has made you into the cultural being that you are today. When defining culture, it can be defined as socially constructed, shared by its members, both objective and subjective. It may be defined by geography, ethnicity, language, religion, history, or other important social characteristics. And culture is usually socially transmitted. Culture usually refers to something that is made by human beings rather than something that occurs in nature. Thus, while sand along a beach may be a natural occurrence, the condominiums along the beachfront are not. In everyday use, some terms that are often used to describe social groups and are important to the cultural elements are subculture, which is where members of the group share characteristics that distinguish them from the larger society in which they are embedded. There are lots of subcultures. Examples are corporate culture, adolescent culture, drug culture, culture of poverty, academic culture. Then there's microculture, and the members of this group share distinguishing characteristics but tend to be more closely linked to the larger society. Examples of a microculture could be a school, a classroom, a work setting. Then there's ethnic group. Members share a common heritage, a common history, and often a common language. Some ethnic groups in America are Irish American, Native American, Lebanese American, African American. A minority group is members occupy a subordinate position in society. This term isn't used as much now because it mainly means what it sounds like, in the minority. So there's a majority group and a minority group, which is kind of hard to say because, for instance, in the United States, white Americans are vastly becoming the minority, or everyone else is the majority. We will talk about this in more detail when we get to the unit on Master Harold and the Boys. And the play takes place in apartheid South Africa. And during this time in South African history, the majority of the people there were of African descent, meaning they were black. However, they occupied a subordinate position in society. The minority were white people, and they were they were in a more powerful position in society. They ruled the government, they decided the laws, they implemented a lot of the work opportunities for the people, the African people of African descent. So to better accommodate how to call other people, oftentimes you'll hear the word people of color, and it refers to non-white groups. So when there is an opportunity for you to say people of color and they might still be in the majority, like in South Africa, that helps explain what that group dynamic is. And that's, like I said, everybody except for white people. So culture concerns itself with people's assumptions about life that are often unspoken and hidden from consciousness. Thus, most Americans, while putting a hand out to greet someone new, assume they will do likewise and that they can shake hands. This might not be the case when meeting someone, for instance, from Japan. Culture solves a lot of common human problems. It's a means of communication and a language for those people, like Americans sticking their hand out. That's a means of communication for a lot of Western cultures. Determination of power and status, regulation of reproduction, family. An example of this is in China, most families only have one child because of vast overcrowding in China. And this goes along with the systems of rule and government. Government helps to pay for one child per family, so most families have decided to only have one child. Culture also helps with relationship to nature, magic, myths, religion, science, all those things that you hear passed down are through culture. Concept of time, and that's temporarity. And an example of this is, for instance, in Hawaii, just go with the flow. In Africa, people call it African time, and you might have heard the term until the cows come home. Well, if the cows are taking up the streets, there's no reason to rush and get somewhere on what we call Western time. Take your time. You have to wait for the cows to come home, and then it'll get done. Culture also has to do with significant lessons and history that's also passed down. Cultural representations like music, story, dance, art, all of that is entailed, and we'll see more of that as we delve into what is art and understanding what is theater and getting more and more into our semester. Culture is a collective creation that most members of the group practice. For instance, in the United States, again, it is common for people to unconsciously walk on the right side of a hallway or a sidewalk. In other countries like Britain, Australia, or New Zealand, it is common for people to walk on the left side of hallways and sidewalks. The contributions of cross-cultural psychology. While sociologists and anthropologists study groups and psychologists study individuals, cross-cultural psychologists study the interactions that occur when individuals from different groups meet. Cross-cultural psychologists may approach this problem from one or two perspectives, which we'll talk about. Excuse me. So consider this when meeting people from outside groups and how it can be helpful for you, but also understanding that there are different understandings of culture. When meeting someone and inviting them to happy hour after work, it is clear to most people that they should expect to spend no more than a couple of hours at a bar or a pub and not plan to make a night of it. But some cultures might not have ever heard of happy hour. They might think it's just a time to be happy, or that you're supposed to drink all night, or that it's just an hour. So all of those are examples of being in a cultural subculture, a subgroup, and needing to understand through language the means of communication. So culture is both objective and subjective, something we touched on earlier. Objective culture is physical artifacts, language, clothing, food, decorative objects. Subculture is the attitudes, values, norms of behavior, social rules, meaning of objective cultural elements. And this just means oftentimes, again, in Western culture, we think objective is fair. It's just an easier way to be able to show what's right or wrong. Oftentimes in Western tests, a lot of standardized tests, this is one of the issues that many multicultural educators have a problem with. When I was teaching in Los Angeles, there was a test where students were asked to write an essay on a time when they had an interaction with something in nature. And the example it gave was, you were on a beach and you found a seashell, or you were in a forest and touched a tree. Well, I worked in South Central Los Angeles, and these students had never been in nature. They'd only been in um, their concrete jungle. They may have had trees and flowers that they'd seen, but they've never been in a place where that's all they could see. So they didn't have a reference, a point to understand what the question was asking, and they didn't really know how to answer it. So, though it was considered an objective question, most the assumption is that most people have been in nature. It turned out to be a question that wasn't culturally respectful for these students who had not had that opportunity. Think about differentiating between objective culture and subjective culture, and try to provide a couple of examples from each culture that you can think of from your own culture, your own ethnic group, and identify like 2 examples of each. 2 ways to understand culture. One is culture-specific approaches, and they help to understand a particular cultural group, for instance, Native Americans, but do not account for in-group differences, for instance, the different tribes within Native Americans. The other way to understand culture is culture general approaches, and it helps to understand how culture works in people's lives, that it's a universal perspective, and it helps to suggest questions to ask of any culture. So once you get this Common Core list of questions, you can ask it of any culture and understand that culture a little better. The cultural learning process. Sources of cultural identity and knowledge for individuals in complex societies like the United States. People tend to identify themselves as belonging to various cultures, social groups, depending on their personal biographies. And you are going to have an opportunity to do this. Think of this as you're doing the Animoto project. There are 12 major sources of cultural identity that influence teaching and learning, which we will talk about later. So, as Americans, we can identify ourselves within our ethnic groups, within our regions of the country, nationally. We can also identify ourselves with our religious groups, our families, where we work, where we go to school, and then more specifically in our sports that we play. The list goes on and on and on. And all of those things help to identify who we are. Cultural knowledge is transmitted by people and experiences. We gain the knowledge that contributes to our cultural identities through interaction with various socializing agents. These agents mediate our cultural knowledge in particular ways. So think about your own childhood experiences and how they help to develop and teach particular values and practices. For instance, the American value of individualism is often introduced to young people through early jobs they may have had, such as paper routes and babysitting. For me, that's what it was, babysitting. How we learn culture is through socialization, and there's 3 stages of socialization. The primary stage is the first stage of infancy and young children. They're only socialized usually by primary caregivers and their family. This is a major step because pretty much the children are sponges. Everything that's put into their brains in the very beginning helps to identify who they are. Secondary socialization is in childhood and adolescence. It's by school, the religious affiliation, the peer group, the neighborhood, and the media. And in the Western culture, more and more, the media is a huge socializing agent for our youth and even our adults and even our children. This is the time when parents are very concerned as to who their children are hanging out with, because that helps to shape them and their culture. And then finally, adult socialization is the workplace, travel, assuming new roles in life. For instance, graduating from high school, going to college, graduating from college, gaining a career, moving out of your parents' house, getting married, having children. All of those help to socialize adults. They change when there's different points in their lives. Think about what ways your parents or community socialized you to understand your social class, and consider also how the media has socialized you. Some results of socialization are not all the time good, but we can't be surprised that they happen. And it basically just, even though socializing causes people to internalize things, it can give these type of results. The first one, which can be bad or good depending on how you look at it, is ethnocentrism. It's the tendency for people to evaluate others according to their own standards and experience. Ethnocentrism is just being about your own ethnicity. To a large degree, you're told that the Aryan race is the most powerful race. You might end up being a Klansman or a neo-Nazi, and that would be considered negative. Some people think that sending kids to an all-Jewish school or an Afrocentric school is a positive thing, so they can be proud of where they've come from. So this is an example of a result of socialization that can be positive or negative. Perception is of the stimuli received by our senses, and it can overwhelm us if it weren't somehow reduced. How we see things is not necessarily how they are. It's just our perception, and that's based on our culture, what culture has told us it should be. In the Western world, we get a Crayola package when we're young, and it usually has 8 main colors in it, and that's how we identify colors. If someone points at the sky and say what color, we say it's blue. If someone points at the grass and say what color, we say it's green. However, in, for instance, Japan, those two colors are similar and in the same hue. So there is this one word for both blue and green. So if someone were to point at the sky, they would say the same word for blue that they said for green if someone were to point at the grass and ask what color. And this doesn't mean that all Japanese people are colorblind. That's just their perception based on the culture. Categorization is the cognitive process by which all human beings simplify their world by grouping similar stimuli. And basically that's having a prototype. It characterizes the meaning of a category. For instance, if the category were bird, again back to our perception in Western culture, or in the United States at least, we think of a flying bird like robins. We don't think of yard birds like chickens. Stereotypes are socially constructed categories of people. They usually obscure differences within groups. Oftentimes, stereotypes can be negative because even if it seems like a positive stereotype, the assumption is that everybody in that group has that stereotype, so therefore it becomes negative just to assume that everybody is the same. We will delve a little further into stereotypes when we get to the unit on ruined. Think about what you know about your own culture and how you can use that to better understand another culture. And think about what you can do to enable yourself to talk intelligently about cultural differences with someone who's different from you. This is what we'll get to toward the end of this PowerPoint to better get away from some of these results of socialization and better understand culture so that socialization can be positive. Some limits of socialization. While socialization is a powerful process, it does have limits. It's limited by a child's physical limits because it is never finished, and so it just keeps changing. It's never done. It's limited because human beings are not passive recipients. They are actors in their environments. With the environment, the stimuli changes, so do they. So know that socialization always is continuing. It's a continuing process. It's always happening. Here's the figure for the cultural learning process. It includes the 12 major sources of cultural identity that influence teaching and learning and socializing agents. So when you see this wheel, imagine that it turns. So all of these contribute to each other, which contribute to the individual. It's not just one way or the other. So imagine that it turns in both directions and that each can contribute in different ways. And then sometimes some are bigger than others. Like I said earlier, I think electronic media is one of the bigger influences on an individual now more than ever, especially in the United States. So finally, when building a positive attitude towards diversity, it involves several elements. One, questioning the dominant model or the prototype image. Two, questioning stereotypes. Three, looking for commonalities among our differences. And four, thinking of differences as resources to learn from. All of these things can help us build a positive attitude and help us to become more diverse. Try to identify a situation in which you are familiar with a specific pattern of expectations, something that happens within our culture. For instance, in most cultures, is New Year's. So think of something like that. Also, all holidays. Think of holidays within your culture, and then culture and holidays that are celebrated by a larger culture, and then more specifically your subculture, how you might celebrate differently. For instance, a Jewish celebration for New Year is different from a Christian one. A celebration for me for New Year's is at the prototype image in the United States is, if we're going out for New Year's, we are going to dress up maybe. We're going to watch fireworks. We are going to maybe watch a ball drop. We're going to count down. Those are things that in the United States, the ways that we celebrate New Year's. More specifically, for me as a Southerner, for me as an African American, I have different myths. For instance, that my father has always gone around to the widows at our church, the older ladies, and walk in their door, because there's a wives' tale, I guess, that a man has to be the first one to walk in your house in the new year to bring in the new luck, good luck. Also, we eat a big meal like that whole season during Thanksgiving and Christmas, New Year's. It's usually something like turkey or ham, and we usually have collard greens to bring money, cash money, green money, and black-eyed peas to bring the change. So we're asking for money in the new year. So that's just in a way that I celebrate my New Year. Think about how yours might be different. What types of foods do you eat? All of that is part of our culture. I hope this has given us all a little better understanding into culture. By all means, go back and look at the PowerPoint review. It has more slides. And consider all of these things as you have a chance to look at the Animoto projects and are writing and the discussion board for the week. Have a great week, and I will talk to you next week when we discuss what is art. Thanks. Bye.